What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? Today we've got an interesting guest. He's an author and writes something I think Book Talk should be all a buzz about. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself here, and I'll let you give the elevator pitch spiel about who you are and what you do.
Gosh, I mean, so much pressure. Hey, yeah, I'm Brettedwardstout. I'm an author and an activist. I used to do some fancy things. I've been around a little while. My book, A Gay Marine's Story, is a deeply personal look at the concept of what it was like to be gay in the Marines and the process of veteran homelessness. But I participate a lot on TikTok and a lot of TikTok lives, and that's where I think the algo kind of like brought me to you because I often talk about Russia, Ukraine, as well as LGBT rights, especially in the new era of what in the shit show is happening now. So,
Indeed. And so you, I guess, when did you join the Marines? Was it right away, like 18, 19?
so I'm from Iowa, and I think you guys are a little bit younger than me. Us '90s kids, when we really were coming up, the Gen Xers, there was this sense of really the first time that you were not going to do better than your parents. And so I think a lot of
Mm.
us just didn't know what was going to happen with us. We didn't have this concept of, a job and a career and a pension going on like our parents had. This idea that my parents, working minimum wage jobs, were able to save that money and buy the business they worked for. And that was no longer reality. So it was just like, what else was there to do? And my brother had joined the Marines, and he came to me one day and said, they have Russian linguists in the US Marines. And he said, you should consider doing that since you already have a little bit of background in studying Russian in high school. I went to a really nice public high school. Um,
In
and
Iowa?
so in Iowa, yeah,
I didn't know they
my,
had it in Iowa.
well, yeah, okay, so when I was in when I was younger, when I was like first through third grade, I literally walked to the end of a street I owned into a forest, along a creek, under an overpass, and across a field to get to school,
Dude, that
which now feels insane. But at the
Like people
time,
doing downloads on the way there because that sounds like the most Gen X shit I've ever heard.
yeah, we're all just like amoebas flowing into whatever shaped box we're put in. We just kind of get used to it. And so like when it came to the box that I was in at the time of when my brother told me this, it checked all those boxes. Like, oh, I can leave Iowa. I can get additional education in more Russian. I can go somewhere, make a paycheck, and feel like I'm doing something. And so I kind of went into this. And it also like I'm a national champion swimmer. I was when I joined the Marines, I just finished 6 years of competitive swimming, like year round, six
oh,
hours a day, 6 days a week.
it's a lot of
So like
chlorine.
it wasn't like physical fitness or discipline was an issue. So it was kind of a simple transition. Have either of you guys like gone the military eyeballs drifted that way and kind of looked at it and said, "Sup?"
Yeah, I actually joined when I was 17. I signed up for the Army National Guard, and so I did my 6 years of National Guard service, and then just the 2 years of
Yeah, just
extra.
like Pete Hegseth.
Right. Pretty close. He was actually deployed a couple times. I was never deployed, so I was lucky enough not to have that PTSD, follow me around for the rest of my life. But no, I was, feeling pretty not I felt pretty good about Minnesota as a whole, and like I didn't like want to leave necessarily, so I that's why I chose like the National Guard so I could go to college at the same time. And I was much more of a like self-described independent back in those days, and was like I want to like serve my country and like do something greater than myself, whatever. We got the
Was
whole
it your
spiel.
libertarian stage?
No, that was in college. That was in college. That was after. I was like almost Republican when I was like 17 because that's like what my parents were, and that just sort of it's the only thing I knew.
But your parents were around in an era where Reagan was on the ballot, is my guess, right? So like there was
Yeah, they
this
might not have been able to vote for him, but yeah.
but there was this sense that we were all Republicans for that brief moment.
Yeah.
Like so like that's kind of my entree into politics was as a tiny kid was just remembering seeing the map on the television of the Reagan election
Yeah,
and
man.
thinking, "Oh, we're all together. This is just what we all are." So,
We
yeah.
weren't
Right.
together.
And then
Brother never voted for him. I just want to keep pointing that out. We fucking told you so.
It's true. It's
Well, I
true.
don't know what we shit is here, but
Well, Iowa did, so I could understand coming from Iowa, seeing the rest of the country as a all red, basically, um, for sure.
well,
So
oh, poor Iowa.
then, so did you just do 4 years in the Marines, active duty,
So
or
linguists do 5
okay, yeah,
because our
sure, extra
school
schooling,
is so obnoxiously long and
yeah,
incredibly uncomfortable, and I don't know how to describe it in any way other than academic torture.
yeah,
I do not have sympathy for anyone who went to law school or medical school. It is not the same. It is not as hard. You do
Hmm,
not know what we go through. Of the 10 Marines who started in my class, only 2 of us finished. And that's of the people who qualified to go. It's not fun. And everyone around you is failing. And they're angry that you're not. And you're scared that they're going to drag you down. And so you start, like, it's a very interesting kind of social dynamic because you want to be there and you want to be helpful. But at the same time, your being helpful could be the thing that causes you to fail. And so you don't. And so
so it's the
it's,
Hunger Games of linguist training.
it's, it's academic Hunger Games is
Yeah,
maybe that's my new description for
yeah.
it. What
so
was your vocation in the military?
I was a forward observer for artillery, so I would have been embedded in an infantry unit if I was to be deployed on a company level unit. But I got assigned to a uh, um, wow, the biggest unit size. I can't believe I'm failing on
Size
basic.
queen.
No, bigger than battalion. It was like the Minnesota like national or the headquarters battalion basically for the National Guard of Minnesota, and so I sat in front of a computer and ran basically ground space management for artillery uh, uh, basically action. So even my like somewhat grunt job was still somehow turned into a computer desk job for me. It was fine for me. It worked. I was one of the best ones there because I know computers a little bit more than the average person, so it worked out. But it was kind of funny that I thought I was going to end up being like infantry grunt at the end of the day, and didn't end up to be that case. It was only that way because I needed a short schooling period in order to fit between like summers for college and like high school. It's like a requirement that if you join the National Guard, like they would fit you in that. Like I scored high enough, like I wanted to be in like military intelligence or something, but like
Mm.
that's like a year-ish long schooling program, and obviously, unless I took a gap year, which looking back, I should have taken a gap year from college, but that wouldn't have worked out,
Well, I did college after, which was when I was already an old man. And in Iowa
right?
City, where everyone is like 18 years old, and then you're in your mid 20s, you
Yeah, I
might
bet
as
that's
well
gotta
be
be weird,
50. Like,
right? Yeah, yeah. I could definitely see that sort of like you're obviously understanding that college is more important when you're that age, and like the things that you're learning are probably things that you should actually pay attention to versus just like skate your way through it. But you'd probably feel like an outcast from the first day you step on campus.
well, I mean, it's that, and it's kind of weird because some of the some of the younger teachers, I was older than them, and the students kind of look at you with my background, especially like in Russian classes. I felt, I should say, I don't want to ascribe their feelings. But from the outside, they there's those pooches. They they kind of looked to me to communicate with the teachers in a way that they felt that they couldn't, because after being in the Marines, and especially after my first term in college, I wrote my first novel, my very first term in college. And so for much of my time in college, I was already a published author. I was already a Marine Corps veteran. I already had gone to a school that was a better school than the University of Iowa for this language training. And
Yeah.
so, like, something would happen in class, and the students just kind of look at me being like, can you fix that? Like, it was kind of a strange dynamic. It really played out. So one of the things that I got to do, because my life is so long and weird, and I'm like one of those 90-year-old, 46-year-olds. I was a FIPSI scholar, which was the first time the US and Russian Departments of Education ever did anything together. And so I was one of the first 8 American college students to go to a Russian university. And when we were there, which was its own kind of story, it's economics college, and none of us were studying economics, but those teachers in Russia, they were going to teach us some things. And they gave us this initial like exam to show us how much we were going to learn. And on that exam, no one missed more than 2 questions. And the professors flipped out, because what hadn't like sunk in with them was that just by existing in American society from a child, your understanding of basic economics is so enormous, especially by comparison. You don't need to learn what supply and demand is. You don't need to learn about those curves. You don't need to learn about what a franchise is. When I was there, the concept of franchising was still a brand new idea in Russia. It was cutting edge economic tech, whereas we've known this our whole lives. And so they weren't really expecting the general American to know all those things. But 2 brave teachers stayed on. And when they would say things that the whole class knew was incorrect, again, there was that look at Brett, and it'd be like, "Извините, госпожа, но я думаю, что ваш ответ был немножко..." Like, starting to talk to politely correcting the teacher mid-class. And the teachers who stayed, they rolled with it in stride, and I established a different kind of rapport. Man, those other students, though, they really missed out, because they were so young, except for one of the other guys who was 23. Their concept of what was going to be cool was just off base. So this one kid was just constantly trying to chase girls. But like one day, the younger of our Russian professors at Plakhanov Academy in Moscow, she's a beautiful redhead woman. She goes, "Oh, like my brother and I, we're going to have lunch. If it would dinner, if you would like to come with us." And the students were like, "Ew, hang out with your teacher? How boring." And I looked at this guy and was like, "Oh, this is gonna be good." So we went. Her brother comes with his 2 friends. Can I curse on this show?
Oh yeah.
So fucking literally.
Okay. So her brother and her 2 friends, the teacher just goes into a permanent state of embarrassment. The brother sits down and says, "Oh my god, you're fucking gay, guy. Oh my god, I can't believe I've never met gay. You fucking..." And the very first thing they do is the 3 of them order their opening round, which is 6 glasses of wine and 18 shots of vodka. Round 1. Dinner begins. Let's go. And that whole night is just like that. We're at this sushi restaurant in downtown Moscow, and just like, that's the cool thing. And all the other kids are back homeless, like learning how to like cook kasha with their host families.
That was amazing.
Oh.
So what years like were you in Russia then? Like physically there?
So I went for the schooling was 1 month at Plakhanov Academy in 2008 is when I was there, and I served in the Marines from 1997 until 2002.
Okay. See, I'm just, because you tell us how you went there and all of the American students knew so much more about economics than, anybody else around and all of that. And I think it's funny. I would like I would like a comparative test now run the same thing today because American grasp on economics is like a 2-year-old jumble at this point.
What?
I just can't imagine that would have the same effect as it did back then.
TikTok Live certainly starts to change your perspective on things a little bit, doesn't it? uh, yeah, I mean, and maybe we're also talking about a slightly pre-selected, self-selected microcosm of students at the University of Iowa, who are these kids that are going to. They already have a kind of general kind of base education. I used to be super for um like Iowa being first in the nation for the primary because Iowa seemed to back then understand that if the banking community didn't economically prosper, they didn't buy food. And if the film industry didn't prosper, they didn't buy food. And if the trucking industry or the steel industry or the coal industry didn't prosper, they didn't buy food. And we made the food. So, like, the universality of needing the whole economy to kind of move along and really be looking what we would now describe as intersectionally across the country was that. Now, no. Post Fox News, no. Post Roger Ailes succeeding in what he pitched to Nixon back in the 70s of creating a deliberately misinformed, deliberately miseducated electorate has fundamentally changed everything about how our entire society functions. Like, it's like I told you before we started, like, nothing matters now.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point to make, is because the Midwest has shifted a lot over the past 4 or 5 decades. It used to be really progressive, especially economically progressive, specifically because of those reasons. Like farmers in rural Midwest understood macroeconomics better than a lot of economists in New York City and Chicago and out west, and that was because you needed to know, you had to plan well enough to survive uh, growing seasons and what was on the horizon. And it's not like you can just adjust in August to set up for what's coming in December. Like, you need to be able to have that figured out in May before you put crops in the ground, and understand how all of this is going to affect you and how you need to prepare for it and when you
There's
can
less
invest.
immediacy.
Mm-hmm.
You had to think further forward about how this was going to affect next year or later that year. Like, there was so much more looking at the long term, as opposed to now where we live in this TikTok feed me that next video sugar rush that we live in now. And like,
but I think it was even more than that. Is it wasn't even having to know what was long term. It was having to understand how all of the things fit into what was long term. So what was happening in the global economy or the national economy, and how that was going to affect what's happening in rural Iowa or rural Wisconsin or rural Minnesota. Like, that stuff was important. And then on top of that, it was us. It was always the rural Midwest communities that were affected the most by recessions and depressions. And we'd seen, we were the first ones to get hit. We were the hardest ones to get hit, and we were the last ones to come out of and recover from it. And, the FDR days and the New Deal, the farming community really benefited immensely from that, and the country as a whole. But understanding that farms were what was able to. Sorry, there's a noise coming through in the background there. Anybody?
Yeah. Is it just like your computer overheating, Brett?
oh, are you hearing a little like noise? I apologize. That means it is currently 3:00 and the fish are being fed. My fancy aquarium. There's an automatic feeder. It is stopped now. It just comes out, dumps a little food in. I didn't know that it was going to pick that up, but yes,
no worries.
The kids. This is Lumiere, my little black and white clownfish swimming around. There's some other critters in there as well. Yeah, like.
But what I was getting at was that farms being stable, so having those farm subsidies, having government price supports and price floors and price controls and all of the uh, the government welfare is really what it comes down to. You know, farmers are the biggest welfare queens in the country, and that's not a bad thing. It's what supports our entire economic system, right? The global economic system, if we're being accurate, because if you've got a bunch of people who file for bankruptcy, a bunch of farms that go under 1 year, then sure prices might be really cheap that year, but the next year they're going to be through the roof because you've got nobody to supply the now needed demand. And so they understood how important the government intervention in the economy and the government support in the economy and that big picture stuff was. And that's why these people always voted for these progressive programs. And yeah, since the propaganda of Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and all of that has come through, it's amazing. You drive around and you see all of these farms with giant Trump signs on the silo and shit like that. And it's like, you're the people who stand to lose the most. And it's just the idiocy and the ignorance of people who lived through it, and they knew it. They used to know it. Some of these old fuckers, you know, they came from that, and they've been that thoroughly brainwashed.
But you have to, you know, at a certain point, like I don't know that we are smart enough to overcome this, like I put it earlier, amoeba fitting itself into the shape of whatever box that we're in, of being able to learn anything. And when you have the primary information source deliberately providing incorrect information, and then the auxiliary information sources giving oxygen to those same made up sets of information, is our system incapable of handling this moment that we're in? I think it's an open question. I was on a TikTok live last week where I brought up this thing almost like I was a prophet, just like that I have to spend almost all of my time arguing about shit that doesn't exist. And that's the reason, like, everybody's trying to say, oh, trans this or and all that about why we lost the election. There's one very clear answer why we lost the election, and I don't hear any of these people saying that, which is that we had to spend all of our time talking about shit that doesn't exist. We're trying to talk about, it's like, oh, their policies, this, and what they said in their stump speech. None of that matters. If I had to spend 20 minutes explaining to somebody that there are 0 kids pooping in litter boxes, that there are 0 kids who are going to school and coming back transgender post-op. Like, none of this is real. CRT isn't real. None of these things exist in the way that you're trying to describe them. And so if we can't get to have a conversation about anything else, like, if those things existed, we would all agree with them.
Yeah.
If they're running on magical policies that couldn't ever possibly be implemented against a candidate of their own invention. It was somebody that I was listening to, I think on NPR, who put this really beautifully, which is that Trump is the creator of an entire fictional universe like the MCU or like Harry Potter. And in that universe, he is J.K. Rowling, he is George Lucas. And because he's the single arbiter of what is the rules of that universe, he's the only one who can ever be right. And everyone else has to adapt to his rules, even if he decides to break his own canon. And in that universe where everyone thinks this, MAGA Harry Potter is real, what do we do? And I don't know what the answer to that is, because to them, all of these made up things exist that don't exist.
I think that's the wrong question. I'm going to come out, because those people are a lost cause. At this point, they are bought in. There is nothing we can do from the outside to crack that shell and bring them back into objective reality. They've insulated themselves in a bubble, but they are still the minority, right? But the problem is, is that we need to figure out how to get the people who aren't in that universe and have bought into that canon to the ballot boxes to understand the real issues. And here's, I think, where we end up with a lot of problems is Democrats are always playing defense. We're explaining to the people why kids aren't shitting in litter boxes, right? Why did we wait for it to get to that point where we need to explain that? Why are we always the 3 steps behind? Why are we having to why are we meeting them where they're on immigration, on trans rights, on all of that stuff? We are always behind and fighting that narrative. And that's the problem is, yeah, there's definitely those people that you're talking about who are in that world. But then there's people who are just don't give a fuck about politics. And they hear this stuff. Oh, I heard from so-and-so that I trust that apparently there's kids identifying as cats and shitting in a litter box in the classroom. And they don't know. They don't really care. They just heard it from somebody. And those are the people that we're having to play defense on. And we need to be playing offense on it. And we're focusing so far on the people who are so far gone, we can't touch them. We can't get to them.
The problem is that from my perspective, and maybe there's like, I don't see a solution to this at present. And this is how I kind of bring it up. The thing is like, hey, your yellow hoodie, did you ever consider ironing it before coming on the show? Now, your hoodie doesn't need to be ironed, but now part of your mind is already taken up by the idea that maybe it does. I've created a non-existent problem intentionally, and I don't know what we do about that.
Again,
do we create our own?
Well, what we do is, so to create that reality, the right has spent monumental amounts of time, energy, and resources forming that reality and selling it to the people who will buy it. Because you're not going to come out on day one with a normal, rational, because these people, a lot of them at one point were normal, rational human beings, right? You're not going to come out on day one and be like, Hillary Clinton's drinking children's blood in a pizzeria basement. You're not going to come out to them on day one and be like, oh yeah, people are eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio. You need to come out and be like,
I love these made-up hypothetical examples that you're coming up with hyperbolically. No one would ever come up with those things in the real world.
Never.
The reality is, though, that like, it seems so ridiculous to us because we are still in that rational mindset of that's fucking insane. You don't come out, Jewish space lasers are not going to be something you buy into on day one. And so you need a little bit, something that's not completely ridiculously out of the realm of reality that gets you kind of bought into something that gets you there. And then you keep having to move those people consistently to the insane. And that's what the right has done really, really well, is they don't campaign in a campaign year. They campaign 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and they campaign through cable media. They campaign through radio. They campaign through TikTok and YouTube and Rumble and social media platforms we've never even fucking heard of. They meet the people that are the most easy to influence where they are at, and they pipeline them. And the left doesn't do that at all. The left comes out and it's a year and a half before a campaign. They start rolling up their campaign stuff. They start talking about policy and all this stuff, and they build no brand. They don't really construct decent messaging. And then they win or they lose, and then they pack it up and they go home until the next election, and they start that all over again. And so that's why, yeah, we do need to start creating our own narrative, our own universe, as it were. And our universe can be objective reality, but we need to be selling that to people the same way that the right does. And we're horrible at it. And this is why we're always playing defense. This is why we're not, because we could,
Yep.
sorry, just to keep on this, we could be coming out with the absolutely insane shit Republicans really actually do, right? Like Matt Gaetz sex trafficking girls and stuff. Like, we could be pounding the shit out of that way before it ever, came to light, and had made this like, oh, now obviously Republicans are this group of predators, which they are, and we can back that up, but we could have been selling that for years. And we haven't. We let them be the family of party values, them be the party of economic prosperity when they're the ones who have run up the most debt and created the biggest party deficits. we haven't been selling that message. We can create the same world in objective reality, but we don't. We just play defense to whatever they make up.
I'm all for you. Like in 2008, I wrote a column for a Midwest paper called Access Line, called the Republican Blue Period, which I basically outlined the entire world that we live in now, very very sadly. But the thing that I detailed in that piece was the fact that we are allowing a single party to overtake symbols that the Democratic Party is not understanding the importance of. A single party owns the symbols of the eagle, the flag, 1776, the words patriotism, freedom, the Constitution, and originalism, to the point where people aren't voting on policy. The reason why you go into a TikTok live and have a debate with somebody about policy and they have no idea, but they still have really firm convictions, is because they're just voting on those symbols. And I have been screaming about this for over a decade now, that I wrote this article in 2007. And so we're not understanding that when Biden nearly got run off of the road during the campaign by Trump flag-toting trucks, Biden should have shown up at that next campaign rally with even bigger trucks with even bigger flags. Like that dumb symbolism is important. Like, we need to start showing up in idiotic suits with the Constitution printed on it, but we're gonna black out all of the parts of the Constitution that they're violating. That we've decided, this is the new Republican Constitution that we're gonna wear. Like, there's dumb things. There's things that people don't quite see. Jasmine Crockett is great. More Jasmine Crockett, please.
No, absolutely. So, and you're right. It comes down to branding, which we've been talking about to death. But when you go buy a tool or a truck or food, you're buying it based on the brand that has been created in that imagery in your head. What is the coolest? What is the strongest? What's the most efficient? Whatever brand is in your head, and nobody goes out and really does the research to verify these claims that brand has sold to them. They just, the one that makes them feel like that's true. And the Republicans,
nobody that you want to party with, anyways.
Yeah, exactly. So no.
Actually, DeWalt is not the best at.
I actually got roasted at my bachelor party for being the well actually guy, so I still go to plenty of parties though.
I have to know that people at work just must openly talk about me as the brand new non sequitur of the day guy. Like today, I woke up absolutely obsessed with Donatella Versace's new face. And I know that there's a whole conversation to have about whether or not we talk about women's looks, but when your look is a brand, I think that it's something that you can be talked about. I don't know if you guys have seen this yet.
No, but I'm gonna look it up for sure.
Anything that I've probably ever.
Lady got a whole new head. She is a whole different person. Now, she looks great, I want to say. Not that you have to look great to be of value, and I don't want to say that, but just I came and I probably told 15 people about that this morning. I was just like, did you see?
Oh, that's fun.
But
I think to get this back a little bit on the rails here, because none of this was on script, which is perfectly fine. We do this every single time. Tell us a little bit. So you were in the Marines. Obviously, you're very openly gay, and and you have now written some books. Tell us a little bit about the books, which you assure us are not super spicy books, but they sounded kind of spicy. And what motivated you to write those, and why, what you're hoping to accomplish with them, and kind of how that fits into the grander scheme of your and our world.
So, when I served 1997 to 2002, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was the policy was the law of the land, and I got very involved in the repeal movement. But before that happened, the whole time that I was in the Marines, people would ask me constantly, what's it like to be a Marine? What's it like to be in the Marines? What was it like to be gay in the Marines? What was it like to have been a Marine? And it was just this constant kind of question that was asked, and they want this answer that, as I like to put it, they expect in 25 words or less, or they want you to tell some type of a salacious sex story from the barracks about hooking up with other Marines. And so how do you go about kind of answering that question? And when I first started in college, remember I was a little bit older when I began college. My very first week in college in rhetoric class, we were talking about age, race, gender class as a subject. And I went to the teacher and I said, I think that I can answer this question, but through fiction, if I can have the latitude to do it. And we got permission from the university because the University of Iowa was very pro writing. Um, and I embarked on this journey of, if you wanted to answer that question, how would you do it? And there are a lot of fantastic military insight books that get into some very fascinating personal experiences, but I felt like the question was more complicated and tricky because they're not necessarily asking for a series of events that occurred to you. What they're really asking me is about a state of being. And so when I wrote the first book, Sugar Baby Bridge, I decided to write it in a style of prose called stream of consciousness. So you are in my character's head every single waking second of the day for about 1 week. And so the entire novel, all 130,000 words, is just 5 days of this person's life. Every time he walks somewhere, because and Taylor maybe has some insight into this. I don't know. As a Marine, it feels a bit more acute, but like being a Marine isn't just putting on a uniform. It's every time you walk by grass, you know you can't step on it. Every time there is gum, you can't be chewing that gum while walking. Every time you're standing and walking next to somebody, you need to be walking in step with them. And if they're more important than you, they're on your right. Like, all of these things are all the time. And that's just one little moment. And I decided that I wanted to play that out across it. But a lot of people also had this really big disconnect, especially then, with this concept of homosexuality and masculinity being somehow at odds with one another. And I wanted to elucidate that it was not really the case. And in the book, I go through a number of things, including the antagonist of the book looking at Brad as this sexy object, but forgetting that the thing that he's attracted to is that this is a dangerous person capable of inflicting actual harm on people. And there's a moment in the book where Brad has to use violence to defend this an antagonist of the book, who's kind of also the love interest, but is more the foil of the book, this slightly older, vastly wealthier alcoholic man-child that Brad is spending his time with. He decides to antagonize some people at a local bar, and they follow him out of the bar, and he realizes that his money is not going to protect him, and then Brad kicks the shit out of them. And it's this very uncomfortable moment for Brad as well. Brad is the lead character, not to be confused with my name, Brett. That he doesn't necessarily want to be those things. He doesn't want to be seen as this sexy, dangerous object, but at the same time, he doesn't know what he is if he's not that. And so he's got this really difficult love-hate relationship with this persona that he's grown into. But to add one more little thing to the pile of this, in answering this question, I wanted to zone in on the idea of not just being a Marine, but having been a Marine and to leave the Marine Corps and have this identity taken from you in this sudden moment. The book in essence begins with a guy asking him, "What are you going to do now that you're not a Marine?" And it's his first time ever hearing that sentence. And it completely wins him and sends him into this identity crisis that takes you across the rest of the book. And the series itself is about that identity crisis, which will end on September 11th with Brad being homeless. And it sounds very, very like everything I'm describing sounds very sad, but it's not. Brad, in his head, thinks he's on vacation. Thinks he's having an awesome time, and every time somebody wants to invite him somewhere, he can say yes because he doesn't have to be anywhere. But the reader is starting to realize, oh, maybe you shouldn't, and maybe you should find some way to pay that phone bill so that you can, maybe have somebody that you will call you who you went to a job interview with. But like, he doesn't see his world burning around behind him because he's attractive and white, and so he has this latitude to fail forward a little bit, but it does only go so far. It's a very long answer.
Yeah, all right. So when you're first kind of describing it, I sort of got. Have you read The Things They Carried?
No, not yet.
You should. It's Minnesota author, excellent Vietnam War book.
Oh, it's Minnesota?
And... No, but The Things They Carried is about his experience in Vietnam, and it's very similar in the way that you kind of described it, as in you're in his head as he's kind of going through the whole experience. And so, like, the beginning, he talks about he gets his draft card and he doesn't want to go. And so he drives all the way up to the Rainy River, going to, flee to Canada and do that. And he's just like standing on the bank, and then starts thinking about what his family's going to think about him, and how, a small rural Minnesota town, and you can't dodge the draft, and he'd be disowned. So he goes back and he tells his experience and the things they carried. He literally goes through and he describes the things that he was literally carrying, in his pack, in his gear, in more detail than you'd ever give a fuck about, right? But like that's the thing, is like you're focusing on those little things. And then one chapter, I remember it was a whole chapter, really intense chapter, and then the next chapter starts out with that entire last chapter was a lie. And it's like it gets you into that experience of what you're experiencing. And then Slaughterhouse-Five kind of gives me the vibes of your explanation as well.
I have actually slept in the same bedroom that Kurt Vonnegut has slept in. So.
Oh shit, that's pretty cool.
So my friend, an old friend of mine, John, in Iowa, owns the old Phillips Mansion in downtown Iowa City, and the Phillips Mansion is where Kurt Vonnegut initially lived while he was dean of the University of Iowa School of Creative Writing. But Mrs. Phillips found out that he was going into drunken benders and putting out cigarettes on the wallpaper, and came back and threw him out. But I lived in that house for 4 months before I moved to New York.
Very cool story.
I've literally slept in the same bed as Hillary Clinton and Madeleine Albright. So weird.
Very famous people have slept. So did you ever deploy then when you were in the Marines?
No, it was peacetime the whole time that I was in. There were some other things that I was involved in at the time, pre-September 11th. The linguist field, it's so expensive to create linguists. I think back then the cost per head was like $600K per unit to put us through school. And so there wasn't a real there wasn't an enthusiasm on behalf of the military to be sending us into harm's way. And we get paid a little bit extra by via the NSA. So there's we're also doing some side work, so they tend to keep us closer to, many of us are closer to what are called the RSOCs, so the Regional Security Operations Centers. There's one in Texas, one in Georgia, and one in Hawaii, and that's why I was stationed in the terrible land of Hawaii.
Sounds pretty rough.
I endured.
Yeah, I bet.
So,
I bet.
So when you talk about don't ask, don't tell, and being gay and in the Marines, and when you brought that up, the mythical dichotomy of being gay and also being masculine, like those two things can't coexist, or the way people thought. And I always think it's funny because those are the same people with the moldy labia sticker on the back of their truck that has the Spartan helmet on it, and the Spartans were very notoriously openly gay or very very gay military force.
Destiny and Nick Fuentes gave us an example of that recently.
Man, Destiny, Jordan probably doesn't even know who Destiny is, but he's kind of come down the right wing pipeline a little bit, even though he's still.
Is that a euphemism?
Right. Yeah.
Now, I love Destiny's way of speaking. I don't want to be so boring as to say, like, I don't agree with everything he says. I like his way of speaking. I like people who speak the way that he does. He's better at it, I think, than people like Jordan Peterson is.
Sure. I like how upfront he is, but I don't like that he's kind of got like the Ben Shapiro, like kind of word salad sort of thing. It does sort of like become difficult to, it's not very concise, and he says a lot of words very fast, and they're generally.
And you're right.
I would make the distinction, however, that people like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro are rattling off, much as we would do as linguists, oftentimes to sound more fluent than we are, pre-memorized word combinations that they don't fully understand, which is why every time you ever see them actually called to answer a question, they have to sit and try to figure out what the fuck you said, because they're not nearly as good as language as they are, where Destiny fully does appear to have a full grasp on that language and is able to come back faster on topic without having to be like, oh, he asked something in this field, so I'm going to answer something that I kind of like put together with these kind of like. So I want to kind of draw that that distinction.
That's fair. Not to say that his conclusions are generally like the greatest by any means, but I hear what you're saying. He definitely can respond to the actual conversation.
Yeah, he's good
better.
at dishing it,
right.
Which is the thing that we've kind of we're inside of we'd like to be post, but we're still in this Gish Gallop space where you just throw out so many things so that the some of, like, if you say a single answer, you throw out 10 things, one of which is true, 9 of which are objectionable, but you only have time to respond to 1 or 2 of them. And he's much better at staying on top of it,
Sure.
and being able to quickly knock down that. Pete Buttigieg is the same way, to I think a higher, more thoughtful degree than Destiny, but also less bombastic than Destiny is. And that's also what I love about Jasmine Crockett. She does her homework. She comes in. She knows that there's a set of things that are going to probably be discussed, and so she knows those things, and she's reviewed the likely bullshit that's going to be thrown out by the other side, and she is ready to take those things on. But, like, to go back real quick to the don't ask, don't tell and the masculinity thing, like the idea that Marines even needed to be masculine, that this was a required thing for being these kind of instruments, or even what is the definition of masculine, was something that we, I think, in the 90s, when I joined the Marines, weren't even debating in the way that we are renegotiating what it means to be masculine now. I think that Gen Z is fascinating and frustrating. I've got some incredibly hot dudes that I work with that are Gen Z, and like your gaydar doesn't work on them because they understand that wearing a pink t-shirt one time isn't going to be a threat to their masculinity in perpetuity the way that a Gen Xer, I think, does, or somebody, even a millennial. Like, that masculinity can be taken from you, that heterosexuality can be taken from you.
Why did Gen X get that way, though? Because, like, y'all grew up with the, the sex god icons rocking unitards and high heels and crimped hair, perms and shit. Like the 80s rock and that just the 80s in general was a very very gender fluid when it came to the way that people presented themselves. And you thought that I would think that that would have made Gen X more comfortable in their skin coming out of that.
You would think, but remember that, Freddie Mercury, died in silence of AIDS. Like it was not addressed. He was there sending these coded messages that we all now clearly go, have you seen the Radio Gaga music video? Like we look at that now, but like my grandma was in shocked disbelief when I told her Liberace was gay. So we need to understand that the Gen Z is coming up in this new kind of post Drag Race environment, where flaunting your sexiness and getting attention for being a sexy man is now okay, and that attention, like these guys that I'm talking about at work, they're actively soliciting the sexual attention of gay men because they think it's awesome, and it never registers to them the idea that this would do anything to talk about whether or not they're actually gay. And I think this is something you see happening much more slowly on the MAGA side of things. But look at Good Trouble. Like Good Trouble, like with his armpits out, like every day, like wearing his little kind of skimpy outfits with his ass sweeper broom of a mustache. Like that dude is what we would for a little while call gay baiting so hard, but he doesn't care. And that's what's awesome.
I realized it with Good Trouble. Never crossed my mind. Now that you say it, I see it for sure. But yeah. No, I think that's and I've never understood like the people afraid of being like hit on by a gay man or found attractive by another man. I'm like, well, it's flattering. I mean, I'm not into it, but I'm very, very flattered. Thank you. Like somebody thinks you're hot.
Good Trouble's whole series that he's doing with that guy who's like, I'm a liberal guy. Yeah. Look at the series that he's doing there, because that guy doesn't fathom that masculinity isn't something that can be taken away from you because you did yoga instead of lifting weights. No. That somehow, like this concept that masculinity can be taken from you, with trans stuff being in there. This is something that I talked about with a really incredible person in our very first podcast episode with Boomer Banks. We had the trans pop star Mila Jam on, and we were talking about where anti-trans violence comes from and where this comes from, where anti-gay violence, where it becomes so obnoxiously absurd to a degree that you guys probably, even as informed as you are, don't know how barbaric things have been. Scotty Weaver is somebody I would encourage you guys to look up. Scotty Weaver, post Matthew Shepard, was a gay guy who was kidnapped, tied to a chair, had his fingernails removed, was pissed on, lit on fire, and partially beheaded for being gay. And so where does that level of extreme violence come from? And right now, most of that is being directed at trans people, because people in this environment of brittle masculinity think that I am attracted to this thing, and society has told me that being attracted to it means I am no longer a heterosexual man. And once that is shattered, the glass is broken forever, and that comes out in this moment of extreme violence, which is not in any way to give cover for it, but instead to explain why it's so... because masculinity in America, masculinity in Russia, and a very few other places in the world is a constant all-day, everyday performance for people. You can't dance a certain way. You can't move your hand a certain way. You can't use words like pretty or fabulous. You can't listen to certain music. You can't wear certain colors. And if you do, that heterosexuality in your, group is gone forever. And that is where this is coming from. That's what Gen Z is.
Very accurate. I think a lot of people, especially when you see in TikTok lives and on the comments and stuff like that, where people try to attack masculinity in a way that they think it's going to bother the poster. I get that all the time, where people try to come after my masculinity. I'm like, is that supposed to be an insult? Because it's never going to land the way that you think it's going to land, and it's not new. I just saw somebody else post a video going back to the 1920s, and a comic in a newspaper political comment type thing was like the modern couple, and it was a man and a woman who basically looked, the same, riding a motorcycle, the front and the back, because they're both wearing pants and a striped shirt and have short hair because that was the flapper time, kind of a moment of women's liberation. And the same thing is people, I think you're absolutely right, are insecure the fact that they may be attracted to something that is not the stereotypical thing that they would be attracted to. We kind of got to... Oh, go ahead.
And not willing to process through what they're even attracted to, because they're trying to put things in categories that don't exist. Many trans women and trans people can look however they want, but some of them do certainly ascribe to, images of extraordinary feminine beauty. And if that's what turns you on, they seem to not be able to compute that in itself is the definition of what you're attracted to. And just because you are retroactively ascribing some other category to them which conflicts with that, that's not something to be so upset about. And it kills people. Like trans women especially are dying.
And
literally,
huge risk, and obviously it's only going to get worse with the environment we're creating in this country now and after this election, and how emboldened
trans healthcare was at SCOTUS today.
Yep, emboldened people are a lot more emboldened to go out and commit that kind of violence and harassment and hate. And it's truly terrible.
What I argued to Congress when I was part of the repeal effort, and I was working on getting the votes to get Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal out of committee and onto the Defense Authorization Act, was exactly that point right there, is that it's not that everyone in the military is angry that there are gay people amongst them. It's that this law empowers people to acts of violence against people's physical person or against their career, and to ruin their lives because this fraction of empowered, insecure people are so tremendously given this power by this law that they do things like what happened to Barry Winchell, where he was beaten to death by members of his own unit in his sleep with a baseball bat for dating a drag queen.
Tragic.
Well, and that's kind of the thing I did a little bit of research trying to see like what specifically is Trump kind of looking at, and there's kind of two aspects that I found. The biggest one is that like absolutely basically any and every trans right that we have fought for, that they have fought for the last decade or two, whatever, is up for grabs. That there's basically that they're going to have to fight for just to maintain at what they have, and they're probably not going to be able to maintain everything over this next 4 years. It's going to be challenging.
It's worse than that. So if you take the intersection of Project 2025, Agenda 47, and Clarence Thomas together, what you have is Clarence Thomas making an open advocation in his Dobbs concurrence that Obergefell and Lawrence and Hodges, Obergefell, Griswold, and Lawrence should all now be on the chopping block. And that is your right to all non-procreative missionary sex as a gay person or as a straight person, but has only ever been enforced against gay people. This is the idea of constitutionally making it a state-by-state case whether or not it is illegal to be gay. And there are still 12 states of these United States where there are anti-sodomy laws still on the books. So if that is to be repealed, which would be the official position of the administration, it would overnight become illegal to be gay in 12 states, including Florida. So you have that, you have the repeal of gay marriage, which is the rights to visit your loved one or inherit property, and in some cases possibly owning property. The guy that I brought up earlier, whose home that I lived in, where Vonnegut had lived, his 4 sisters, when he was younger, had sued him because they did not feel, the legal argument that they raised was that since gay people can't procreate, they should not be allowed to own property. Like, there are things that people don't understand had to be litigated. In the late 1960s, when this all kind of began going down, it was illegal not to be wearing 3 articles of gender-specific clothing. Wearing drag or wearing clothes that were not sufficiently feminine or masculine enough was literally a jailable offense. And you didn't just get a fine, you went to fucking jail. And if you went to jail for that, that meant you also could be evicted from your home and fired from your job. Like, the catastrophically non-hyperbolic existential threat that we are facing isn't made up. Like,
No.
all of these things that they're making up about kids shitting in classrooms and litter boxes, that's all fake. The stuff we're talking about here in this conversation, this is a real this is a real thing. This has already happened, and many of the laws which were superseded by Lawrence, those all go away, can go away.
Yeah.
It's pretty upsetting.
Yeah, I mean, and we saw it with the abortion ban, obviously, with Roe being lifted, and how many trigger laws went immediately back into effect. And it's going to be very similar if any of these laws protecting the LGBTQ community get lifted.
Project 2025. Oh wait, what you got?
Oh, I was just saying we are coming up kind of on the end here because we do have another guest we need to set up for. But I did kind of want to bring it back to something just a little bit lighter before we ended this, because
keep it light, keep it gay.
Obviously, yeah, it's going to be a very gay question for you. Obviously, your books are about being gay in the Marines, and I'm curious how many Marines you can piss off here. But I want to know just how gay is the Marines? Like, was it?
I have said over and over and over again, there's nothing gayer than a straight Marine. The degree of the number of times that I have been around Marines talking about ejaculating and getting hard and talking about each other's boners and jumping up and down in front of each other in silkies, there is no degree of thing that, like, they would make men in a bathhouse blush with some of the conduct that they do with each other. We're talking about pre-no homo. We're just homo. Like it's great and wonderful and awesome. And then when they do these super, super gay things and then it gets called gay, they turn into instant Pikachu memes. Like, but it's it's awesome and not awesome. But like the third book, as I keep bringing up, like visual aids. The third book is really heavily about that. You brought up earlier that it is spicier, and that is something that I wanted to very carefully and very thoughtfully get into in that book, which is this idea that many people don't understand, that two men can have sex with one another, and that does not mean necessarily that they are gay. I hooked up with very many straight men in the Marines, and they are still straight after we did it, because opportunity for pleasure is not a definitive decider of desire. it's not the same thing. I bring up the example, you go and you get a massage at a massage parlor and you've got a blindfold over your eyes and you get a happy ending. Is your sexuality determined by seeing whether or not the masseuse, when you leave that room, is male or female? What if what if it's a super masculine male or a super feminine, or super masculine female or very feminine male? Like those things, they're not deciders of what your sexuality is, and there is this kind of like spectrum of pleasure. Like the whole reason why glory holes are fun is you don't know who's on the other side.
I think that might be part of it. That might be part
They're
of
not called unhappiness holes.
it.
Also be the blowjob. Who knows? But
That's right. Well, yeah.
Right.
but anyway, no, I think that's great. Did you have anything else, Taylor?
No, I was just gonna say I could relate to about half of the things you listed about just your
Glory holes.
Yeah, that one for sure. No, about your fellow soldiers. I don't know that the army was quite so gay, but they were definitely like borderline. And a lot of there's like a couple things I was like, yep, did that. That's a new one. That's a new one. So,
I mean, the Marines are way better at everything. We're much better at being gay.
I mean, you guys try harder. That's for sure. You guys try harder at everything.
We give it our all. Yeah.
Too. No, I feel like that's really anytime you get a bunch of guys together where it's just guys, it gets that way, which has always been weird for me personally. It makes me incredibly uncomfortable when a bunch of guys who are not gay or openly gay start acting like that in a situation. I just don't know how to interact with them.
We wouldn't have the term circle jerk if it only happened one time.
Right, exactly. And so I can definitely picture it. But anyway,
you're picturing it right now.
Yeah,
I am just visualizing. Just give me a second here.
You're like, where's Destiny?
But anyway, we really appreciate you being on. I think we can definitely have you on again at some point to talk a little bit more about this kind of stuff. But we want to give you a chance to plug all of your whatever you want to plug, your books, your whatever else you're doing with your life that you want people to know about, your TikTok channel, all that stuff.
I am perfectly good tooting my own horn. Please support artists, support authors. If you know any of them, if they have books, buy their books, pay the monies for them. You can find any of my books from A Gay Marine Story on Amazon. They're very easy. They're on Amazon and Kindle. Sugar Baby Bridge, Semper Civilian, and Point and Shoot are the first 3 books. Support me on Patreon at Brettedwardstout, and I am a huge proponent of Blue Sky, where you can find me at Brettedwardstout. And are you on the Blue Sky yet?
I am.
I'm
good,
not.
because I need to follow you there. I'm a really, really big fan, and if you need any pointers on some of the more powerful features of Blue Sky, hit me up. I've given a lot of people tutorials.
I've just been posting links to my videos on it because everybody's like, you need to create a Blue Sky, and I'm like, I never did Twitter. I barely do threads, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be more engaged. So yeah,
well,
definitely.
What is your Blue Sky for everybody who's listening?
It's just OffJawaggon, all one word. You can't do spaces or underscores on Blue Sky, so just OffJawaggon, no spaces or underscores. And yeah, thank you again so much. Please, everybody, go check out his books, check out his channel. It's just Brettedwardstout on TikTok.
Brettedwardstout, the whole word.
Brettedwardstout everywhere, exactly how you think it's spelled, 2 T's. As always, we appreciate your support as well. We've got a Patreon, we've got a YouTube subscription, we've got all of my OffJawaggon merch as well as the Let Them Eat Toast merch at offjawaggon.com. We've got ways where you can just send us cash if that's what you feel led to do. We appreciate it. But more than anything, we really just appreciate you guys listening, watching, however you consume the podcast, however you consume our shorter form content. This is why we do it, is because people listen to us blabber on about this shit, and all of the rest is a bonus and a little bit of a necessity because we live in a capitalist hellscape. But we're muddling our way through. But definitely, your guys' support and interacting with our content is why we do it. And we appreciate the hell out of each and every one of you. You got any closing words, either of you?
I just wanted a special shout out to the live, Corn Dizzle and Tinkerbell. Appreciate you moderating our a very short YouTube live. And then Brett, we definitely should be doing some TikTok lives with you. If you want to schedule a live when you're planning on doing it, just let us know. I think we could definitely make that work
Yeah, jump on
and
and
join you.
Let's get her done.
All
sure.
right. Awesome. Well, thank you
Hoorah.
all for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Thanks again, Brett.
That's right. Take care, guys.
All right, and then we'll end it.